So, William Shakespeare. You know the name, right? We've all studied the plays. But what if I told you his real influence goes way, way beyond the stage? That it's actually woven into the very words we speak, and maybe even into the basic code of how we think. We're about to dig into how Shakespeare's work isn't just something we read, but in a really profound way, it's something we are. Okay, I know what you're thinking. That sounds a little nuts, right? A bit over the top? But it's a serious question. One that some of the world's sharpest literary minds have grappled with. It really gets to the heart of what made Shakespeare such a revolutionary. So, could one guy with a quill pen actually invent the way we understand ourselves today? And here's the guy who made that claim most famous, the literary critic Harold Bloom. Now, his argument is that Shakespeare's characters were such a massive leap forward in psychological depth, so complex and so real, that they basically created a new blueprint for what it means to be human, a blueprint we've all been using ever since, whether we realize it or not. But how on earth would you even do that? Well, it wasn't a single magic trick. It was a two-part mission. See, you can't build a complex, modern inner world if you don't have the right tools. So, before Shakespeare could invent a new kind of person, he had to start by forging a brand new kind of language. And this brings us to the first part of his revolution, his role as, well, the master architect of modern English. He didn't just write with the language of his time, he was actively building it, brick by brick. The sheer scale of this is just mind-blowing. We can trace the first recorded use of over 1,700 common English words back to a Shakespeare play. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. These are words so basic, so fundamental to how we talk, we can't even imagine speaking without them. No, let's be fair. He probably didn't invent every single one of these words out of thin air. Some were likely floating around in spoken conversation. But Shakespeare was what you'd call a linguistic catalyst. He had an incredible ear. He'd hear a word, see its potential, and then put it on stage in such a perfect, powerful way that it became locked into our vocabulary forever. And this wasn't just random luck. He had a method. He was like a blacksmith in a word forge. He'd add prefixes to things, giving us words like uncomfortable. He'd take a noun and just decide it was a verb now, which is why you can swagger into a room or elbow someone out of the way. And he'd smash two words together to create these really vivid new ideas, like eyeball. And this example shows you exactly why he was doing it. Before Shakespeare, you could be alone. That's just a physical description. But he gives us the word lonely, which is a complex internal feeling, an emotional state. You see, he was building a vocabulary for the inner weather of the human mind. He needed these new words because he was trying to describe a whole new kind of consciousness. I mean, just look at this short list. Critic, swagger, the green-eyed monster as the perfect picture of jealousy, a wild goose chase. These aren't just words, they are whole concepts, little bundles of meaning that we still use every single day to make sense of our world. Okay, so he's got the tools, he's built this incredible richer language, now he can get to work on his second and even more radical project, building a completely new model of the human mind. To really get what a huge deal this was, you have to see the before picture. Plays in the Middle Ages had characters named, literally, everyman. And he wasn't a person, he was an allegory. He'd hang out with other characters named Good Deeds or Fellowship. And then you get Hamlet, a guy who is bitter, brilliant, self-doubting, sarcastic, and totally paralyzed by his own thoughts. He's not an idea walking around on stage, he's an individual. The fancy word for this is interiority. It's this wild idea that inside each of us is a deep, complex, often contradictory inner world. A consciousness that's constantly talking to itself, arguing with itself, and even surprising itself. This was the new model of a human being that Shakespeare was putting on display. And his secret weapon for showing us this inner world? The soliloquy. Now, before Shakespeare, a soliloquy was simple. A character would walk out alone and basically just tell the audience, here's my evil plan. But Shakespeare completely transforms it. It becomes a window into the messy, chaotic, real-time process of thought. You're not just hearing the conclusion. You're watching the mind work. It's basically the birth of stream of consciousness centuries early. And all of this leads to his greatest invention, what we can call the theatrical self. He took the literal world of the theater, an actor on a stage being watched, and he turned it into the central metaphor for how our own minds work. The idea is that we all have an inner stage, and on that stage, our mind is split. We are, at the same time, the actor speaking the lines and the audience watching and judging our own performance. So, let's see this in action, right? The best way to really get this is to step inside the minds of some of his most legendary characters. And here we are, probably the most famous lines ever written in English. But this isn't just Hamlet trying to decide if he should live or die. No, this is the performance of a mind at war with itself. He's acting out the universal human experience of being paralyzed by thinking too much, by being too self-aware. But here's the brilliant twist. Hamlet says all of this knowing he might be getting spied on. So is this a raw, authentic moment of despair? Or is it a carefully calculated performance of being mad? The fact that we can't be sure is exactly the point. Shakespeare is showing us that the line between our real self and the self we perform for others and for ourselves is impossibly blurry. And it's not just philosophical debate. With Macbeth, we get a front row seat to the anatomy of a guilty conscience. That dagger he sees, it isn't real. He knows it isn't. It's a fatal vision, a hallucination created by his heat-oppressed brain. Shakespeare literally makes a psychological struggle, ambition versus morality, into a terrifying physical object. We don't just hear that he's conflicted. We see it manifest right there in front of him. So what happens when we put these two massive revolutions together, the linguistic one and the psychological one? Well, you get an echo that has fundamentally shaped the last 400 years of how we think about ourselves. You know, in the end, Shakespeare's two great projects were really the same thing. The language had to evolve with the consciousness. He had to forge new words because he needed them as tools to build these new, complicated minds. And his ultimate gift to us was that powerful metaphor, the theatrical self, this idea that we all understand ourselves as the main character in a drama that's constantly playing out inside our own heads. So, did Shakespeare literally invent us? Maybe not. But you could say he gave us the source code. He gave us the language and the operating system for modern self-awareness. So, think about it. The next time you're debating something in your own head, having that silent little argument with yourself, just ask, are you the one speaking the lines, or are you the one watching the show?